All right, we are going to start diving into resilience. And first, we're going to talk about what resilience is and isn't. And then we'll get into a bunch of practices and processes around it. So, when looking at resilience and what it is, it's really an innate capacity. We are inherently resilient beings. And there's a lot of research that kind of points or sheds a light on how we can access resilience. But what we're looking at and what we mean by resilience, it is our inherent capacity to bounce back from stressful, traumatic, oppressive conditions. It's our inherent capacity to be able to heal. And it really is that experience, and we all have different words for it, but it's that experience where we get connected to something that feels like wisdom or wholeness or a quality of connectedness that is bigger than the really difficult things that have happened to us. That's what we're looking at inside of resilience. You know, I have worked for so many years now with people who've experienced deep forms of trauma and systemic trauma. And then I've also, of course, been in the process of healing my own experiences that way. And mostly I'm just blown away with how inherently resilient people are and can find those places, whether it's spirit or nature or a connection to animals or creativity, that usually people found when they were young and then found a way to keep accessing them as a way of sustaining hope, right? Building wisdom. So through this process, we'll want you and of course your clients to find your own words and access points for resilience. But it is that inherent somatic capacity to come back to states that are more whole, more connected, more resourced. The second piece I want to add, and this really comes from some study that I did with Bessel van der Kolk, is it's also the capacity for a positive imagination about the future. Resilience brings that capacity for a positive imagination for the future. And I know we've just been working on declarations, which is also just that, a positive imagination for the future. And of course, there's sometimes in healing or just life when we're actually not sure what we want into the future or what the future holds, but we can still practice that resilience and have it help us be with the unknown. All right. So we're inherently resilient. Our communities and our peoples, wherever we identify, are inherently resilient. And orienting toward resilience and resources is very, very important when we start to address trauma, the impacts of oppression or internalized oppression. Good, so we're just kind of unpacking what resilience is, and it's very important. I want to talk about what resilience isn't because it gets used in a particular way. Resilience is not an excuse for certain people or peoples to be traumatized or to not have what they need. So often it's like kids are resilient is used to not interrupt child abuse, or is used to not advocate for kids and for youth to get to have safety and belonging and dignity. It also is often targeted at poor working class communities. It's like, oh, poor people are so resilient. That is a way to perpetuate oppression and to perpetuate kind of this big gap between the uber wealthy and the wealthy, and then people who are poor and again don't have access for basic needs. And then lastly, it's often used against BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, about communities, again, being resilient. That really is about creating an excuse for white supremacy or racialized oppression. So I just want to invite you all to kind of listen for the ways that resilience gets used or manipulated by the system. And the last thing I want to add here is resilience and resilience practices are getting used more and more by the military. Now, I really want to support that people who have seen violence, done violence, been part of military service, I'm such a big commitment to those folks getting access to healing from trauma. And one of the ways it's being used inside the US military is doing resilience practices so that in the field soldiers can get back to being in the field as soldiers faster. That that use of resilience I don't agree with. It's like using resilience to get balance enough to continue to perpetuate a certain kind of violence. So I want to invite you all to just listen, like, how does resilience and use of resilience make us more whole, more vibrant, more connected, more able to heal, and more able to create equity? And then where is it used in ways to keep reinstating or making excuses for a system that's more of a power over system that's based more on violence and separation? All right, so next what I'm going to do is just talk about some of the research that's out there. There's a lot of research out there about resilience. So if you have your favorite, go for it. I'm just going to highlight 4 pieces. So the first one is with Dr. Alicia Lieberman, and she was really looking at inherent resilience in kids who've witnessed violence. Okay, so supposedly violence wasn't done to them, but they'd witnessed violence in their homes or in their neighborhoods and communities. And when she went in, she was looking at a whole bunch of different things, wondering if it was genetically predisposed or what was happening in the neurobiology of different kids. She was also looking at their brains, what was happening in their brain development. And in witnessing trauma, there was a certain shutdown in certain brain development, and some kids were able to kind of wire themselves around that. So her findings is what I find most fascinating. What she found is that the kids who are more resilient at the level of brain and brain development had one or more of the following. They had a connection to something bigger than them. So mystery, God, spirit, that wasn't necessarily mediated by anyone else or by a religion. So they felt like they had access to something that was vaster or some mystery. The second one was nature. And that was anything from like a tree in a local park to kids that had access to wilderness, but a connection to nature. I often think that nature reharmonizes us. Nature and wilderness helps to almost reorganize us back into some broader harmony, different than the discord we might be in. But nature was one. So spirit, nature, animals. So some connection to an animal, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this from your own lives or the folks that you're working with. Could have been a cat, a rat, a horse, but a connection to an animal that felt like a positive connection. And then the last one was to art and creativity. And that could be music, that could be dancing, painting, drawing, but creativity became a place of focus and resilience for those kids, again, whose brains showed as more resilient. So you can just notice for yourself, in that research, do you relate to any of those? I know I personally really relate to spirit and to nature. Those are 2 big places where I'm like, oh yeah, that is where I go to build or to renew resilience. All right, so the second piece of research is by Judith Lewis Herman. And if you haven't read some of her pieces, she is amazing. She really took a very big risk in connecting the impact of more intimate violence, like child abuse or intimate partner violence, with what we used to think of as the real traumas, which is a trauma of war and political violence or political torture. And she was really the one that brought a feminist view to it and said, no, same. These violences are different, but they're having the same traumatic impact on people. So she really looked at what were some of the psychosocial resilience factors, like folks who experience resilience and then were able to really build and rebuild meaningful relationships, play a part in the community, feel purpose-led. So what she really focused on, or what got revealed, were helping others is a large resilience factor. And some of us might relate to that, right? Being therapists or healers, that capacity or ability to help others, not just in a trauma, because sometimes we're too isolated to do it there, but as kind of a way of life. So helping others can be a really big resilience factor. Another piece was making greater meaning. So being able to make greater meaning of the ways that we were hurt or traumatized, or even our life experiences, is a resilience factor. And I always want to balance this out with, it doesn't mean that harm or violence or oppression was right or okay. It just means that when we make greater meaning, like this happened to me, I know the terrain of healing, and now maybe I could contribute that to other people. Or my family had this particular immigration experience and struggled, and now I can participate in social change work in a particular way. That making greater meaning helps build our resilience. And then the third one from her work is about relationship and contact. That those people who are able to sustain relationship after traumatic experiences rather than isolate tend to be much more resilient. So relationship, connection, that's positive, right, and mutual, helps to build our resilience. All right, so that's number 2 on research, and you have all of this in a handout, so you can go back and look at that. The third piece I want to talk about really comes from Bessel van der Kolk, and he talks about resilience connected to some of the work that he did directly post 9/11. So if any of you have an intimate relationship or were really traumatically impacted by 9/11, you could skip this part or just know that that's what's coming. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So many of you might know this both from the news or from reading, but there was a preschool close to the Twin Towers, and a bunch of little kids saw the planes go into the buildings, saw the smoke and the fire, and something that they kept a lot out of the news, which I appreciate because it's very traumatizing, but the kids also saw people jumping out of the buildings. So Bessel was working with one of these children and having him draw pictures. And he drew pictures just like that, the buildings, smoke, planes, fire, right? All with crayons, you can imagine. And then people falling from the buildings. And then around the bottom of the buildings were these black circles, right? And as Bessel van der Kolk writes about and tells the story, when he said, "What's this?" the child would be like, "That's smoke from the planes, and that's the plane, and these are people who jumped out of the buildings." But when he asked, "What are these black circles around the bottom of the building?" What the child said is like, "Well, those are the trampolines that all those people are landing on." And so resilience, one part of resilience is basically our imaginations. Now, while we as adults know that there weren't trampolines there, to a child processing what they were seeing and not being totally devastated, we have this inherent capacity for imagination and imagining more positive solutions. So many of the visionaries that I know in social justice work, this is one of their resilience factors, is the capacity to imagine positive futures, right? Like when we're doing social change and healing work, we're imagining futures beyond what we're currently living. And so that resilience, that capacity to imagine is life-affirming. So the fourth piece, the last piece of research I want to share with you is from Dr. Pumla Gobodo-Madikizela. And she is a South African psychologist. She actually played quite a big role in the truth and reconciliation process post-apartheid in South Africa, and continues to do very amazing work about using traditional and indigenous processes for healing to help mend individual and systemic trauma. So if you haven't looked her up, please look her up. She was really looking at the impact. This is also intense because I'm going to be talking about South Africa during apartheid. So again, you can skip this session if you need to, or this segment if you need to, or just know what's coming. But still during apartheid, before South Africa winning its liberation, there were a lot of political assassinations by the apartheid regime. And she was really looking at what's happening with people's post those political assassinations within the townships or within the communities. And something that she found is that communities that came together post assassinations and sang together, move together, drum together, had decreased intra-community violence after that external state violence. And this is amazing when we think about collective resilience, right? Part of what we're looking at in healing is individual transformation, but we're also really looking at collective transformation. What are places of practice with others that can build our own and each other's collective resilience? So this was drumming, dance, and singing. And obviously there's a shared cultural context there that's coming from and that's known. What she found in the communities that didn't come together was increased intra-community violence post those state assassinations. So this just tells us a lot about what's happening in our collective somas and what can be possible as also we look toward healing systemic trauma. That collective resilience practices are a very important part of that. Again, music, nature. I think about some of the social justice programs where it's like people go to nature to envision together or practice together or have movement practices together, or even heading out onto the streets together toward a vision is a collective and can be a collective resilience practice. So, all right, there is some of our definition and research around resilience and really its relevance for embodied healing. Now let's get into really discovering and learning how to cultivate resilience. And again, for you and for the people that you work with. So in a moment, what I'm going to invite you to do is do journaling and a writing practice about resilience experiences you have already had, right? Really, I think about it as we're all more powerful than what's happened to us already because we're here still. And that means we have practiced and found inherent resilience just naturally. So this is a place where we want to actually go in and discover those. So here's the instructions. In a moment, I'd like you to just pause this video for 10 minutes. You can set a timer for 10 minutes. And whether you're writing on your computer or in a journal or drawing is fine too. I want you to really write about or access 3 distinct experiences of resilience that you've already had. So again, you can use some of that research. It's like, was it in collective practice that I felt aliveness and more whole or not separated, right? More interdependence or that feeling of wisdom, right? Whatever your words are, fine. Just really access them for yourself. And then in the experiences, let's say number 1, just really let yourself go, where was I? What did my senses pick up? What did I smell? What was I tasting? Who was I with? What was the feeling of the air around me, right? So get as concrete as possible of what the experience was like, almost as if you were there. And if you can discover kind of more than one, like I could do mine all in nature, but let's not do them all in one place. Maybe one is more about art. Another might be nature or animals. Another might be a different form of creativity or music, another spirit, another helping other people. Like again, these are just places you can start reflecting, where do I find mine? So if you want to, put some music on in the background. Again, pause for 10 minutes and go ahead and write or draw about 3 distinct experiences of resilience.